So I think that if there's a way out, it's something like Bitcoin. So
Mm,
it's not to say that Bitcoin is guaranteed to be successful, but it's to say that if Bitcoin is not successful, I don't really see like a second way to do it, realistically. As long as it continues to be secure, decentralized, and developers keep strengthening the ecosystem in various ways, this is what I would argue is the first kind of credible superior money to the
mm.
dollar, and it can kind of slowly choke out the dollar in a similar way that the dollar kind of slowly chokes out emerging markets that mismanage themselves.
Lyn Alden, a distinguished macro analyst and the creator of the Lyn Alden investment strategy, possesses a background in both finance and engineering, coupled with a highly insightful mind. Alden consistently illuminates the numerous challenges inherent in the current global monetary system and advocates urgently for a more efficient replacement. As a staunch supporter of sound money and a devoted Bitcoin enthusiast, Alden asserts with 100% certainty that Bitcoin stands as the ideal substitute for the prevailing debt-based fiat system. According to her, all other alternatives pale in comparison. Alden is confident that Bitcoin's attributes, including its fixed supply, decentralized nature, and robust underlying network, offer solutions to many contemporary financial and economic issues. The fixed supply prevents governments and corporations from indiscriminately printing more money, curbing their insatiable greed. The decentralized status of Bitcoin ensures the protection of individuals' rights against potential infringement by both tyrannical regimes and democratic governments prone to authoritarianism when faced with opposition. Highlighting the evident shortcomings of the current monetary system, Alden emphasizes the struggles faced by the average person, grappling with insufficient pay raises to match inflation and witnessing the erosion of wealth due to constant monetary debasement. In a recent interview with a progressive Bitcoin advocate, Alden delves into the pitfalls of the fiat monetary system and envisions a gradual transition to Bitcoin as a healing force for the world.
Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to drop your comment and observations in the comment section below. Thanks and enjoy the video.
So I think that if there's a way out, it's something like Bitcoin. So
Mm,
it's not to say that Bitcoin is guaranteed to be successful, but it's to say that if Bitcoin is not successful, I don't really see like a second way to do it. Realistically, is
mm,
is probably the pessimistic view. And one thing I kind of cover a lot in the book is and somewhat indirectly is the idea of technological determinism in the sense that the invention or deployment of certain technologies generally has a bigger impact than political decisions because political
mm.
decisions are local and temporary, whereas technology permanently can change things and also can permanently change incentive structures for what sort of political things are even workable.
Mm,
And so the big example I use in the book is that in the second half of the 1800s they invented and more specifically deployed the telegraph system. So they
mm,
deployed the telegraph across Europe, across America. They in 1866 they ran it under the Atlantic Ocean. So then you had instant communication between two continents. By the early 1900s they had it across the Pacific, and so that's kind of the time frame for when the world entered what we can consider kind of the modern era, the telecommunication era of global instant communication, and that enabled instant transactions as well. Banks and various financial entities or customers on their behalf could communicate with each other and agree on transactions. And at the time there was like the gold standard, and gold itself could not physically settle at anywhere near that speed. I mean, basically it had to be transported securely and they had to be verified. That's a much slower process. And so what that technology did was it basically gave banks and central banks and policymakers a lot more leeway because gold had to be abstracted so much to keep up with credit.
mm.
And that gave kind of these monopoly powers to central banks and the banking establishment. And so that's kind of how we ended up in this world of 160 different fiat currencies. If you're lucky, you're born in like the world reserve currency or one of the top 10 currencies. If you're unlucky, you're born in like the long tail of these currencies that go up by in supply by 20% per year, which makes it very hard to accumulate capital,
Mhm.
or save, or have a currency that's accepted anywhere outside of your country. And the only, I think, credible way to kind of more persistently go against that is the invention of digital settlements, basically settlements that can occur as quickly as transactions can.
Mm,
And I think Bitcoin is the first and still basically only credible way to do that in a decentralized way. And so then it becomes a matter of, is it robust and strong enough to slowly gather more and more of that monetary energy? So when you look at emerging market, as they start kind of misusing their ledger and their ledgers falling apart, more and more people in that country gravitate towards dollars or gravitate towards other types of money, and then that reduces the kind of the monetary power of the printers. Like
Hmm.
they print and they get the consequences much more quickly because people are not really holding a lot of their value in that money anymore. And I think over time that's going to happen to the dollar. I think that basically as we get over, now we're over 100% debt to GDP. Now we're running, we're demographic top heavy. Unlike Japan, we have a structural trade deficit. So we have both a fiscal deficit and a trade deficit. Um, we have a much larger military apparatus to support than Japan does. So I think going forward, it's not that necessarily the U.S. encounters like a doomsday scenario. I think it just starts in some ways to have similar consequences to what an emerging market would have,
Hmm.
especially because now, compared to, in an emerging market, the apex predator is kind of the dollar, right? The dollar is always something that in various ways they can try to access. And now Bitcoin is potentially an apex predator to the dollar. It's a currency with zero terminal supply growth. It can be self custody. It's decentralized. By most attributes, it's superior. And so as long as that continues to be the case, as long as it continues to be secure, decentralized, and developers keep strengthening the ecosystem in various ways, this is what I would argue is the first kind of credible superior money to the
Hmm.
dollar, and it can kind of slowly choke out the dollar in a similar way that the dollar kind of slowly chokes out emerging markets that mismanage themselves.
It's been slightly over a month since the U.S. national debt soared to a staggering $33 trillion on September 16th. Presently, it has risen to $33.67048, with deficits projected to exceed 10% of GDP within the next 7 years. This projection doesn't even factor in the nation's substantial and rapidly growing unfunded liabilities or the potential for increased spending on defense, decarbonization, or any other initiatives the U.S. government may undertake in the coming years. Adding to the complexity, the Treasury Department plans to issue an additional $9.2 trillion in debt within the next few months to address the nation's escalating deficits and massive interest expenses. The challenge lies in the diminishing interest from foreign buyers, while U.S. banks, traditionally significant purchasers, remain burdened from previous acquisitions. Consequently, this results in reduced demand, forcing yields on U.S. bonds to be continually raised to attract buyers. The outcome is a cycle of escalating deficits, increasing debt, and subsequently higher interest rates, a perilous debt spiral that looms ominously. This predicament is one of several reasons why advocates for sound money, such as Alden, champion a transition to more viable alternatives. Returning to the interview, Alden explores another crucial aspect of Bitcoin, its intrinsic appeal to human rights.
I think an intellectual exercise to go through is to realize how centralizing and semi-authoritarian CBDCs can be, and then imagine them in the hands of your political adversary, right? So
Hmm.
imagine if you're a progressive, imagine conservatives having the power over a CBDC, having the power of being able to program your money, being able to easily surveil your money, um, things like that. Like, would CBDCs be useful in Saudi Arabia? And if you were a gay person there, what would you think of the existence of that, right?
Hmm.
So basically put yourselves, if you were to kind of roll the dice and you appear somewhere in the world, would you want CBDCs to exist there? Especially, would you want them to be the only type of money there, right? Um, and so I think that's one way to look at it is to kind of realize that you're not always going to be the one controlling the CBDC, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I think if people imagine their own party controlling the CBDC, they're like, well, what's the harm? They say, look, we can make money more accessible to people. Um, we can have various tools. We can track down on illicit activity more. Basically, you can always kind of just list a couple of the positives, but then you just have to imagine that no longer being in your control, and all of those things can be turned against you. That's also why I appreciate the work of the Human Rights Foundation.
Yeah.
They're pro democracy around the world, and they use Bitcoin as a tool for financial freedom, because I think one thing you see is that not a lot of kind of human rights groups realize the importance of financial freedom
Hmm.
and the vector that authoritarian regimes can use to control their people by controlling their finances, surveilling their finances. And that's one of the things that the Human Rights Foundation, I think, thanks to Alex Gladstein, figured out earlier than others. And
Hmm.
they've been kind of, taking a more pro Bitcoin, pro stablecoin in some cases, and cautious of things like central bank digital currencies. Bitcoin energy perceptions changing rapidly thanks to so much education and research on that subject. And I think the next wave to really go after is this human rights angle. And so the fact that the Human Rights Foundation keeps finding use cases. There was a really big person who I think is generally considered on the left. I won't say who it is, but basically they explained that my bringing up the fact that Bitcoin was used by Afghani women in like
Mm-hmm.
2013, and that it allowed women to like have a financial system that empowers themselves. Even allowed some of them to as they left the country be able to leave with their capital.
Mm-hmm.
um, Kind of was like a light bulb moment for them. And so that kind of gave them a foothold. So when they hear like a lot of negative stuff elsewhere, like, oh, it promotes money laundering or it's bad for the environment or something like that, they're like, well, wait a minute.
Alex Gladstein serves as the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing and safeguarding human rights worldwide, with a particular focus on closed societies. Gladstein contends that Bitcoin embodies principles of free speech, property rights, and open capital markets, curbing the influence of oppressive governments. According to him, being a Bitcoin advocate means addressing the shortcomings of broken democracies and combating government corruption by restricting its authority over individuals in societies where democratic structures have faltered. Gladstein firmly believes that Bitcoin is intricately linked to fiat currency and asserts that Bitcoin offers a remedy to the flaws inherent in traditional currencies. In his view, Bitcoin addresses these issues effectively. What are your thoughts on Lyn Alden's interview? Do you share the belief that Bitcoin stands as the sole viable replacement for the global monetary system? Feel free to share your comments and observations in the section below. For more Daily Dose Crypto news, check out these two awesome videos on your screen. Click now and we will see you on the next video.